Well, I just want to say thanks for everybody for coming out tonight. My name is Dan Davis. I'm the network administrator at Shine Brothers Corporation here in town. I've been involved in technology, networking, network admin for close to 20 years now. Worked at the Spirit Lake Community School District. I've been down in town here now at Shine Brothers for almost 6 years. It's kind of off and on. The thing I'm going to talk tonight is backup solutions using ownCloud, kind of incorporating that into the scenario that I have. And I'm using ownCloud not as its own product. The corporate environment that I have set up right now, I'm running virtualized servers, and we have a corporate solution application that we're using that's a paid-for application. One of the things that I ran into with the application, with the design and the environment that I have, is I also administer about 8 remote locations besides our corporate office here in Spencer. And so at my remote locations, the issue that I was always running into is how do I go and grab data that needed to be backed up? So managers, office managers, and employees, when they're working at computers, like in their My Documents, how do you get that when they're not logging into the same network as you are? They're not being exposed to any Active Directory servers. And so this was a solution that I ended up coming up with. I'm gonna go ahead and start. If you guys have questions as I'm doing this, it's kind of impromptu. I mean, we don't need to wait till the end. If you've got a question, you know, what you guys are currently doing, what you're looking at, just go ahead and ask.
And you're saying this is a cloud-based backup server that you're using?
This is. So this is, how's it gonna come up here? What's going on? Whoop. So the first one is just ownCloud. Are we? There we go. So one of the things when I first talk about is why go and back up data? And I threw kind of a quick little PowerPoint together here. I mean, the reason to go and back up your data is computer crashes, theft of equipment if you have a laptop, things taken, virus infection, hard disk drive failure, either in a server or workstation. And in the center, I kind of put a little blurb there about all data has value, and that's one of the things that I really strongly believe in is, you know, when I talk to different companies in my own environment, I have a real strong belief that all data has value, regardless if it's financial data, if it's family photos, if it's, you know, SQL database, if it's Active Directory stuff, if it's pictures, if it's Word documents, if it's Excel. Everything, you know, in electronic format, I have a strong belief of that has value. And, you know, one of the things when we were talking about, I talked with some of the coworkers there, you know, about virus infections and kind of watching what they do on the network and watch how, you know, the emails and stuff that they open up. You know, when you talk to your accounting department, you know, those of you here with other companies or businesses, I mean, what would it be like to try and run your business, your day-to-day operations, if you didn't have access to data or if you didn't have it backed up? One of the things that I'll talk to kind of going through this here, with viruses specifically, those of you that have heard of CryptoWall, CryptoLocker, TorrentLocker, TeslaCrypt, one night after work I got a phone call and I tell people I had the fortune and misfortune of spending 3.5 hours with a local company in Spencer, or Milford rather, that had been affected by ransomware. And basically what had happened is that an email got opened, ransomware was executed, and it basically locked and encrypted their files. And it does it with a pretty heavy encryption, what they call like an AES 256-bit encryption on those. And when I went and talked to their tech person on site, I said, well, where's your backups? Well, the way that they had done their backups was that they had mapped a drive, a network drive, from computer A to backup server. And what CryptoLocker and these ransomware, what they do is anywhere that they can seek out and have the permissions to run, they do that. Whether it be on your local C drive, so if you go into My Computer, C drive, or if it's a map network drive, as long as that user has the appropriate permissions, that file will run, it will propagate, and it ended up encrypting their data. And so my next question then is, where's your offsite backup? Where do you guys have files that are backed up offsite? They didn't have any. And turning around and taking a look at, after about 3 hours, looking at what had happened to their network, I basically told the owner of the company, you've either got to wait 6 months for this, for them to send you your files, or you have to pony up the money. I mean, that's what you have. When you sit there and you talk about encryption of these type of files, I kind of equate it when you talk to people that aren't quite as techy, and I said, imagine this, when they talk about encrypting files, because people say, well, it's just a key and a lock. I mean, why can't you just figure out how to unlock my files? And to that I say, if you were to drive to the East Coast of the United States and you handed somebody a key, and you went and you traveled to the West Coast and handed another person a lock, what's the chance in that lifetime that those two will ever meet to go and unlock that information? I mean, that's the type of encryption that is being used with some of this. And I have kind of a little blurb on here. We'll put this online. So if you guys want to look at some of the links on here, one of the things that was in the news, there was a hospital in California that ended up paying $17,000 in a Bitcoin ransom to get their information back. The company that I dealt with had to go and purchase 5 Bitcoins at the time, was about $2,500 to get theirs back. So there is a need to go and back up your data, make sure that you have good backups and that you have it off-site. So one of the things that I always talk to people, I always go by a 3-2-1 when I go and talk about backups, like having 3 instances of your data on 2 different types of media and 1 off-site. So in my scenario, in the environment that I'm in, I've got my 1 instance of data that's live, I have 1 instance of that data that's on a backup server, and I have 1 instance of that data that's in the cloud. That's my 3. My 2 different types of media, obviously I'm just doing server to server, hard drive to hard drive. I have stuff set up in a RAID configuration for redundancy of my data. But that can also be, for smaller owners of businesses, that can also be something to burning to a DVD or some type of a writer. It can be going to a USB drive, or it can be computer to computer. Back before, when I was doing a little bit of consulting, I talked to a company about going and doing a connection, basically a VPN tunnel from their office to their house, and we just synchronized data between their server to a unit they had sitting in their home. It was just basically a workstation that had a couple terabyte drives in it, and away it went. So why ownCloud? Well, what I've implemented in my scenario is the free version. I like it because it's open source. The clients themselves that you can go and download, run on Mac, Windows, and Linux, it gives me a point of having a centralized backup of my remote locations, and it's web-based. So with a little bit of training, what I can do is I can have my remote users turn around and log into a web interface and be able to download their files. And towards the end of the presentation, I'll go and connect into my network, and I'll hopefully be able to show you that. The other thing that I like about this was there is the ability where you can throttle the bandwidth through the client running, where you're not chewing up your bandwidth to try and push large files. So in my particular environment, what I ended up doing was I run a virtualized environment, and I spun up basically a virtual server, and I'm just running Ubuntu. It's just a Linux server. I'm running version 14.10 LTS, which is long-term support on that. In my virtual settings, I set up this thing to do 500 gigs. I allowed, I think it was like 4 to 6 gigs of RAM and 2 processors. And that's all that I did. And then I also have instructions on here too of the actual commands that I used on kind of a blog spot or a blog that I do. So once that was done, and I got that configured where I could log on locally as admin with an administrative user, then you can turn around and just dump your users, put in their credentials, and you can group them by, what I ended up doing was grouping them by different locations. So with that being done, once I went ahead and set, and you can kind of see on the bottom right-hand corner, I'll kind of hover over it with my mouse here if I can. That's the little icon right there. You guys, maybe you're not seeing that. Right next to desktop there, it looks like a little cloud with a green check mark. That's what the users on the end users on their desktop end up seeing. So there's usually green, which means synchronization is in place. When I first set this up, there was a green with a little circle, means it was doing synchronization, the first pull, and if it's gray, it means it's disconnected. So what's nice is if I'm not, with a little bit of instruction, I can end up having someone at my remote location call me and say, hey Dan, the little cloud's not green anymore. What's going on here? So I can go and take a look at it. Install that on the Windows clients. I didn't throttle any bandwidth because at some of our remote locations, we had larger files, they had picture files that they wanted to push across, so I didn't bandwidth limit, I didn't throttle that to begin with. What I ended up doing after the fact, once it was done, I basically do 80K down for their downloads and I only do 10K up. This software too, with very little configuration, will go through and take a look and only pick up the changed files and replicate those. So once a Word document is done or an Excel document or everything out of their My Documents folder is done and completed, basically ownCloud will go through, take a look at it and say, I only see 3 changed files, and it'll immediately start synchronizing. One of my early on issues, I tried doing this, and those of you that are familiar with Linux environment may know what rsync is. It's basically a copy command that's run in Linux, Unix, and I believe in Mac too. John's shaking his head. The beard of knowledge agrees, so we're good there. The problem that I was having with rsync is on the clients themselves in a Windows environment, it has to be set up and run as a scheduled job. I also had issues because a lot of times now, due to viruses, malware, things of that nature, you don't want your local users on that machine to be administrators or have administrative rights. That's how a lot of this malware, ransomware will go and propagate, because it executes with the permissions of the logged on user. So between having people turning off their computers, rebooting their computers, trying to set up a scheduled job, trying to turn around and have that run at a scheduled time, there was issues there where some of these backup jobs weren't working correctly. The other issue I ran into too, trying to use rsync with this, was that some of the files, when they got copied over, the permissions didn't carry correctly. So when I tried to access the files, even as administrator on the server, it was telling me I was locked out of those files. So then I had trouble with the clients trying to go and access those files and bring them back down to their machines. So that's why when I found out about ownCloud and started looking at it, it was a better solution for me. So I went over some of this already. The scenario that I have, virtual server running, corporate LAN, already in place. All of my locations were set up and connected through a VPN, a virtual private network, back to our corporate office. I did obviously had a need for Windows clients, remote networks, secured connection there. One of the things I ended up doing later on was rsync runs in 2 forms. It can run as a client and it can run as a server. So one of the things is once I actually got this set up and working well, now I have all that data on one server. Well, now where's my 321 that goes into that? I mean, I've got 8 locations and I've dumped all that data on one server. So I did turn around and run rsync Linux server to Windows server. And it's the Windows side, and it's called Delta copy, is what rsync runs in a Windows environment. And with that, I was able to go and propagate and move those files between Linux and a Windows world for backup. Having a backup and a copy of your backup and a copy of your backup. I can't stress that enough. When you've been there without your data, without your files, when you've experienced a company and looked at an owner of a company and said, hey, you know, you got to pony up $2,500 here because you didn't have backups in place that you actually needed. And so, yes?
Did you have your Ubuntu server as a member of the Active Directory?
No. Nope. It's just a standalone. Yep. Yeah, I didn't have it as Active Directory or anything. I basically spun it up, I configured it, I installed LAMP on there, and went from there.
With the version, the latest version of Samba on Ubuntu, it's pretty easy to do that if you want to. And then the other thing that you have to do is you have to use what are called POSIX ACLs to get the extended group permissions.
Yep.
That you use that Active Directory.
And see, with this, with the version of ownCloud, and it's documented in how I set it up, you can either run it with like a MySQL or a Maria database. And because I was pretty new at doing this, I went with the Maria database. And so all those permissions, the user accounts and accessibility, just got wrote into that onto the fly as I was setting that up. So it was easy. I mean, it's real slick. I mean, I was thinking about, yeah, you're right. I mean, how do you take Samba, tie that into Active Directory, and make sure that authentication happens between both worlds? Well, this was just an easier scenario to begin with, you know. So, and there's more things that you can go and do with this than what I did. With me and the setup that I'm doing, I'm not exposing this service to the internet. I mean, it's all staying network to network. And it's not saying that you can't do this. You can go and set this up, instead of doing HTTP, to do HTTPS, the secure, and you can set up your own certificates and do a public and private key and hand off that public key to the clients, and you can encrypt that data. But then again, you've got to go ahead and punch that hole in your firewall and allow HTTP, HTTPS traffic inbound to your box, into your server to go and do that. So, configuration and my rollout to clients. I've documented the how-to on mine. Dan Wando was my takeoff of Taekwondo. That's the finishing move, guys, right there. That's it. So, when I went ahead at my remote locations to go and push the clients, I basically did that during when they were off to lunch. You know, I didn't try and figure out a cool way of doing this that would have been really geeky to go and push this in a login script or do it after hours or roll it through a group policy object. I basically just kind of did it old school and said, hey, when are you going to be gone? When are you gone for lunch? And I just downloaded the client on their machine and I turned around, I set it up and I ran it, is what I ended up doing. I mean, my scenario is that at my remote locations, I probably have no more than 10 computers. So those of you that are sitting there and you have 100 computers at your main site and you have 50 computers at another site or 100 computers, yes, obviously you don't want to sit around at night and log into different people's machines. I mean, there would be a much better way, a more efficient way of going and rolling out this client, the software install to your clients to go and do this. Once the setup is done, you basically log onto the client side and say, what file do you want to grab? And I just say, I want to grab everything out of my documents. And with a little bit of training then to my remote users, and I tell them time and time again, if you save a document, save it in my documents and create a shortcut out to your desktop. Plain and simple, because I can grab it and I can restore it. If you create a bunch of Word documents or Excel documents, and those of you that have been in tech support or dealt with this, Bubba's in the back laughing. You go to somebody's desktop and all of a sudden there's like 50 Word documents on their desktop. And it's the head of sales and he's just, if I lose one of these, if I lose my client list, So there's some education that needs to happen and say, move these into my documents and then create the shortcuts back out because you can turn around and grab those then. And so there is a little bit of give and take. I mean, from the tech side and setting this up and assuming how this is going to work, and then turning around and putting on the other set of shoes as the end user and going, this is how I've always done it. This is how I've always done it. I mean, I always just save it to my desktop. So there is some training, there is some education that needs to go and happen, in setting this up. This is a view from the client side. This is just the 4 windows that you click on the account, activity, general, and network. So here, and I'm just kind of picking on a user here. Denny was my user, and I'm backing up Denny's documents. The next one here, you can click on activity. This just runs just as a task. So it sits there and it talks about what file is being grabbed, what's being backed up, and there's an exclusion list on here too, which I like. So if you turn on and somebody's downloaded like a service pack or an executable and they dump it in there, my documents and their download, you can exclude not grabbing that. So if you've been on site working on a computer and let's say you download Office 2013 Service Pack 1 and it's a 400 meg file, you don't really want to have to back that up. I mean, there's no need to. So you can exclude, what I ended up doing, I excluded like exe files, MSI files, DLL files. I mean, you've got somebody that might bring something from, some type of program into work and they want to go and install it and for some reason they dump it in their My Documents folder. I mean, the biggest thing that I'm worried about is Office documents and their pictures and images because in the field that I'm in, working in the scrap metal, I mean, we rely on images a lot to prove, what we're selling in the loads, things of that nature. So you can actually watch the activity, which is kind of nice for troubleshooting. On the general tab here, I have it launch on the system startup, and you can say show crash report or show desktop notifications. It depends on your scenario. If you want the end user notified that there's an issue, in that translation, in that transmitting of data, it can pop up and warn them and say, hey, your account is offline or lost connection to the main server. And on the network, you can see down there where I've set and limited to 80 kilobytes for down and 10 up. When I first started this, I just set them to no limit, and I just let them go. Once I got that information downloaded, then I went back in and I reset it. It was pretty easy to go and do. So here are some of my other thoughts. I mean, my setup, my scenario basically is that like I said, I don't expose this to the outside world. You could go and set this up on 443 and do the certificate. You could maybe do some scripting. One of the things that I was looking at, and John and I have had conversations with, is how can we go and incorporate something like this to do to look specifically at a SQL database? Or how can we do this with an Exchange, an EDB database there? Because right now, in my scenario, what I'm doing is I'm paying for that, for a subscription-based service for the application, for the software that I'm running that specifically is made to go and back that up. So my point and my assumption would be is that there's got to be more open source software like this to make those hooks. I mean, with a little bit of exploration. One of the things too is, doing like multi-point. So, with what I'm doing now again is I'm paying for offsite storage. But I'm not wondering later on to do like an ownCloud and do replication across this and take a server at one of my locations like in Sioux Falls and dumping a server on their network and setting up multiple instances of ownCloud that replicate, that just kind of do a trickle back and forth. Or setting one up, if we'd end up getting rack space out in Chicago, out in Denver, out in Phoenix, somewhere else, and offsetting those charges a little bit. There's a lot of hosting companies out there now that you pay for backup, and I was looking at, CrashPlan is one of them. I think they're down to like $2.50 a meg or something now that you end up doing, but I think there's better, maybe some cheaper solutions out there. So what I'm going to try and do now, if I get back to my desktop, did I lose you guys? I'm going to try and actually log into my work. And I'll log onto my workstation there. And I'll actually show you guys what this looks like. If we can get this to go.
You gave us 1, 2, 3?
Dog. Yeah, it's capital P. 1, 2, 3.
Exclamation point.
And it's 0 instead of an L. We got a 1 plus.
You guys are watching me, I can't type.
Okay, it's in all caps.
That one is. So if I bring this up, so right now I'm basically logged onto my work machine here. Oh, there's a little bit of latency here.
You got the key locked on, right?
No, it's this computer.
Oh, so this is it. Once I got this configured and set up on my Linux server, this was the user interface that you log into. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. No caps lock.
Sure.
So this is the default, kind of what it looks like, documents, photos. I'm logged on as administrator here. So for me to go and add in users, basically I came over under users here. And this is everyone that I have set up that's actually using this at my locations. So you can turn around, you can create a group. You just type in username, last word if you want to put it in a group, and you hit create and it's done for you. I mean, it's that easy. So now, I'm going to log out. So let's pretend that I am a user at a remote location and I've just deleted a file. So here's everything in my documents as that remote user that I can go and click on, and I can simply go and download or upload back into this. What's nice too, and I don't know if he has any PDF, eBay. What's nice too is there's built-in previews for these. So I can go and bring up a Word document, I can bring up an Excel document, and I can go and bring up a PDF on here. The other thing too, to mention, a lot of people say, what happens if you're constantly synchronizing this data? So I delete document A off of my workstation, it automatically deletes document A off the server. 15 minutes later, I need that back. One of the things that's nice about ownCloud is it dumps it into their trash folder, into their deleted items. And I have went and set up on here and said, keep these files no matter what, timestamp them, keep them for 100 days, and then dump them. Which you can go out, however long you want. If you want to keep stuff in a year, depending on how much storage that you've set up to go and do this. So this was an easy solution. So even if I have somebody call up and say, hey, I just went ahead and deleted that, I accidentally deleted it in my documents, can you grab it back? Well, if they log on to their home folders, they're not going to see it, but if they go into their trash, they'll find it in there. So that's kind of nice as well. So that's kind of it. I mean, it did take me a little bit, but
So you started off with the BitLocker scenario.
yep.
So if a machine got hit with BitLocker and encrypted the files, and they didn't catch it for a day, is there versioning on this that you can go back and recover? Because I would imagine that it's going to encrypt the file. This is going to
Well, here's how, I mean, yes, you're basically replicating that, but one of the things I took a look at and said, you know, this isn't using a map drive, it's using a client to go and transfer those. So one of the things that I end up doing with that scenario is why I go and turn around and go server to server then as well. So I do have replication from client to server. So even if those files get encrypted and I look in here and all I see is gibberish and I can go into their deleted folders, there may be something in there I can grab, but also then it depends on how I've set that up or how you would set that up, server to server replication, and if you want to keep instances of those. So there's still some things, you know, there's still some bumps in the road that need to be worked out and kind of gone through, but
Along his question, even if it's not encrypted for versioning, does it support any type of versioning? Even if it's, you know, that Word document gets changed with another Word document, I want
so
the prior
what I'm doing here for that right now is I'm just making a copy, and then if they delete it. And then as far as versioning, I do that server to server. So through my rsync, I'm
But
keeping
there's
it that
nothing
way.
built into here that I can say,
No,
share
not,
two versions in
Because
there.
if you hover over all your files, it said versions. Go up to a couple, get back to your main full files. If you hover over the items next to your
There.
download, it said versions on some of them. Right there. See, it says
but that might be the version of the client that's
download and
running.
share.
Click on the version, maybe he's modified it.
Way over the right hand side.
Yeah, go right.
In the down, down.
Oh, 7 months ago. Yeah, I see what you're saying there.
No, no,
No,
no.
down.
Go
Go down one more.
down, there you go.
Right there, versions. Click on that. No other
So-
little bit.
so
But you probably could turn it on.
Some type of version, he might have.
Yeah.
The Word doc below it, maybe that one also. It's still stuck on the hover. There you go.
There you go.
6 months ago, so yeah.
Oh, nice. That's good versioning. Yep.
So it does. Sorry. Yes, it does. It's awesome.
It does everything.
Thank you.
But if those are Microsoft Word documents, which is what they look like, that could be the built-in versioning that Microsoft does too.
I'm kind of guessing that when they save to the folder and it doesn't sync, it probably, experience a different version, kind of like Dropbox does.
Yeah.
Dropbox does something similar.
Yeah.
So,
That could be cool.
Could you do some type of single sign-on with Active Directory?
I haven't played around with it. Because my remote users, they don't log on to Active Directory to go and do this. I mean, yeah, I don't see why this couldn't work in a Windows environment, Active Directory or not. I mean, that's some things that I haven't explored, I haven't played around with. And the thing that I like about it too, the fact that it's open source, I mean, you can go and take a look at the configuration of it, how it's designed, and you might be able to build something into it, more so than just what I'm doing here. So this was a way, like I said, for me just to go and handle my remote locations. So,
you don't call it runs Python. So the odds of you being able to come up with something pretty high. So,
Well, if it integrates with the SQL database, you can do your own front end, interact with it.
you guys have any questions? I mean, I guess that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Does it support web app?
Yes.
What about
Is-
SharePoint?
That I don't know.
The new version of GNOME desktop has built-in ownCloud support. You can
Oh, that built into it?
Dab FS for it, so you don't have to install the client.
Any questions? Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, guys.